As a joke, I called him a cuck and said he should watch me with other men. Then he broke my heart. Hello, Reddit. First, I'm posting because I really need a place to vent. Right now, I'm confused. I don't know what to do, and I just really need an outlet and also a place to get some advice. My name is Victoria, and I'm a 32-year-old woman. My husband's name is Francis, and he's 33. We've been married for about 5 years, and I've always felt blessed in our relationship. Things between us have always been incredible. No major arguments, no deep-rooted issues. We've had a marriage that, to the outside world and even to me, seemed nearly perfect. Francis is, without a doubt, an amazing husband. From the moment we met, he made it his mission to support me in every way possible, emotionally, physically, financially, whatever I needed. He's the type of man who goes above and beyond for the people he loves, and most of all for me. In fact, sometimes I wonder how I got so lucky. He's always been the kind of person who puts me first, no matter what. Whether it's rearranging his schedule to make time for me or simply noticing the little things that make me happy, he's never let me feel unappreciated or unloved. A few months ago, I started a new job. Before that, I was a stay-at-home wife, which was something I had initially loved. It gave me time to manage the household, and Francis liked the idea of being the provider while I took care of things at home. But after a while, it started to feel monotonous. The days blurred together, and I became bored of the routine. I needed something different, something to shake up my life. So I decided to get a job, not because I needed the money. Francis took care of everything financially, but simply because I wanted to do something for myself, to feel productive in a new way. That's how I ended up at my current job, and it was there that I met a new group of friends. Now, before I go further, I just want to make something clear. I'm not blaming my friends for the choices I made. The blame is entirely on me. They may have influenced me, yes, but at the end of the day, it was my own actions and decisions that led to where I am now. I want to be accountable for that. However, these friends played a significant role in the shifts that started happening in my life, and I think it's important to explain that context. When I met this new group of friends, we clicked immediately. They were fun, lively, and full of the kind of energy I hadn't felt in a long time. These new friends and I started hanging out a lot, almost too much. We'd go out after work, hit up bars on the weekends, and plan little trips here and there. It wasn't just the occasional night out either. We were together constantly, and honestly, I loved it. I hadn't felt this kind of freedom or excitement in years. My old group of friends, the ones I shared with Francis, never made me feel this way. They were always more serious, more settled in their ways, and if I'm being honest, they always seemed to prefer Francis over me. I guess I can't blame them. Francis is charming, outgoing, and the life of the party in a way that I never really was. He's the kind of person everyone loves instantly, and I always felt a bit overshadowed when we were with our mutual friends. They gravitated toward him, and even though it wasn't malicious, it made me feel out of place. I started to feel like I was living in his shadow. No matter what, Francis was always the favorite in any group setting, and I was just there. So when I met this new group of girls, I was over the moon. It was refreshing to have people who saw me for me, who made me feel like I was the fun one for a change. We clicked immediately. But here's where things started to shift. These new friends of mine had a very different outlook on life and relationships than what I was used to. They weren't into the whole traditional marriage thing like Francis and I were. In fact, they joked a lot about how staying with one person forever wasn't realistic, about how people in monogamous relationships were trapping themselves, and how the idea of open relationships could be a great way to spice things up. At first, I didn't take it seriously. We were just talking, just laughing about things that felt so far removed from my own life. But the more time I spent with them, the more these ideas started to seep into my mind, little by little. It was innocent at first, or so I thought. They'd make playful comments about how boring monogamy seemed, or how much fun it would be to just let loose and explore other people. It was all said in a joking manner, but over time, those jokes started to feel less like jokes and more like reality, especially when they met Francis for the first time. When Francis finally came out with us for dinner one evening, my friends were shocked by how easygoing he was. He's always been laid back, supportive, and trusting, but they interpreted that as him being compliant. They joked about how he would do anything for me, and how I had him wrapped around my finger. It became a running joke in our group that Francis was the kind of guy who'd let me walk all over him because of how much he adored me. At first, I laughed along. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, it was just harmless teasing, right? But slowly, those comments started planting seeds in my mind. I started seeing Francis in a different light. I began to question things I'd never thought to question before. Was I really in control? Did I have the upper hand in our relationship? Would he really do anything for me no matter what? I started testing those boundaries without even realizing it. I began to see Francis not just as my husband, but as someone who would never push back. Someone who would always forgive me, always stay by my side no matter how far I pushed him. And push him I did. I started spending more time with my friends and less time at home. Francis, being the trusting and supportive man he is, never questioned it. He never made me feel guilty for staying out late or for spending entire weekends with this new group of friends. He never once complained when I'd come home hours after I said I would, or when I'd cancel plans with him to go out with them. He just trusted me, and I took advantage of that trust in ways I never should have. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was slowly losing respect for Francis, and in the process, I was losing respect for our marriage. It was subtle at first, small comments, little digs, but it escalated. I would make fun of him to my friends, laughing along as they joked about how he would never say no to me, about how easy it was to get my way. It was like I'd become someone else, someone I didn't even recognize. The more I pushed, the more I distanced myself from the man I once adored. The more my friends talked about it, the more the idea of an open relationship began to settle in my mind. It started as harmless conversations, casual remarks about how freeing it could be, how it wasn't realistic to expect one person to satisfy every need forever. They'd joke about how some relationships were better off if both partners were able to explore outside the confines of monogamy. I never took it seriously at first, but over time their words started planting seeds. Slowly, I found myself questioning things I had never thought to question before. My friends would always even joke about how he'd probably be okay with being a cuck, with me seeing other men while he just stayed in the background watching. At first, I laughed along with them, dismissing it as ridiculous. But as time passed, I began to wonder if maybe there was some truth to it. Maybe Francis loved me enough to let me have my way, even if it meant something extreme like opening our relationship. I knew in my heart that Francis was deeply monogamous. He wasn't the type to be interested in anything outside of our marriage. But I also had this lingering hope that for me, he would do whatever it took to keep me happy, even if it meant going against his own beliefs. It wasn't something I planned to bring up outright. That's where I went wrong. Instead of having a serious conversation, I convinced myself that easing into it with a joke would soften the blow. After all, Francis had always been easygoing, and we often joked about the most random things. I figured, what's the harm in dropping a little joke, feeling out his reaction, and taking it from there? That night, we were having dinner together like we always did. I hadn't gone out with my friends that day, so it was just the two of us catching up after a long day. We were laughing, chatting about mundane things, when I decided to throw in the joke, a joke I now regret deeply. I didn't know how to talk about it directly, so I thought I'd test the waters by making a playful comment. That evening, as we were talking and laughing like we always did, I casually mentioned the idea of him being a cuck. I said that he should watch me in the corner with other men. It wasn't serious, at least not to me at the time. I thought it would just be another joke we'd laugh off. But as soon as the words came out, everything changed. Francis went completely silent. I immediately felt the shift, the weight of what I had just said sinking in. I tried to backtrack, saying it was just a joke, but the damage was done. He wasn't laughing. He didn't even acknowledge the apology. His eyes stayed on his plate, and he barely touched his food after that. The rest of dinner was painfully awkward. Every time I tried to make conversation, he gave short, clipped answers. I told myself that he was just caught off guard, that he'd get over it after a day or two, and things would go back to normal. I told my friends about what happened, and they barely blinked. They were so casual about it, brushing it off as if it was no big deal. They told me not to worry, that Francis would get over it like he always did. They were so sure, so confident in their dismissal of the whole situation. They even suggested that I just let it cool off for a while before I brought up the idea of an open relationship again, maybe in a few weeks or months. And the way they said it, so nonchalant, like they had the secret formula for handling these things, made me believe them. I'm ashamed to admit it now, but I believed them. I really did. I thought Francis would just brush it off like he always did whenever I crossed a line or said something hurtful. I convinced myself that it was just another one of those moments where I'd gone a bit too far, and he would forgive me after a few days. I've always known that Francis was more sensitive than he let on, but I took it for granted. I thought his sensitivity meant that he would bend and adapt, that his love for me was so strong he'd never really push back. I never really noticed the changes in Francis until it was far too late. And looking back now, I can see how much of that was my fault. At the time, everything seemed normal, or at least I convinced myself that it was. Francis started becoming distant, not in an obvious way, but in the small things. He wasn't as compliant as he used to be. He stopped bending over backward to make me happy, and there was a noticeable chill in how he acted around me. But I brushed it off. I thought I was overthinking it, that maybe it was just a phase and everything would go back to normal soon enough. One evening, he sat me down. He wasn't angry, he was calm, almost too calm. He told me he didn't like my friends. He said they were a bad influence on me, that they were probably the reason I had even entertained the idea of an open relationship or made that awful joke. And in a way, he was right. Those friends had planted seeds in my head and I had let them grow. He was gentle as he explained this to me, almost like he was doing me a favor by pointing it out. And I believed him. The way he talked to me, it felt like he was genuinely concerned about me, about us. He told me I didn't need those friends, that they weren't helping our relationship, and I guess I agreed. They had pushed me in ways I never thought I'd be pushed. I didn't want to admit it, but deep down, I knew Francis was right. I had started to question my loyalty and values, all because of the influence they had over me. So when he asked me to cut them off, I did. At first, I tried to argue. I told him I didn't want to completely isolate myself, that it wasn't fair. But then I stopped. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that protesting would only make me look guiltier. He was right. Those friends weren't good for me, and they were definitely bad for my marriage. So I cut them off. I deleted their numbers, left the group chats, and distanced myself completely. It felt strange at first, but I thought it was a small price to pay to get things back to how they were with Francis. Then he made me quit my job. That was harder for me to accept. I liked the independence, even if the job was just a way to kill time. But he was insistent. He told me that he didn't like seeing me stressed out, that the job was taking a toll on me that I didn't even realize. He said I didn't need to work, that he was more than capable of providing for us, and that it would be better for me to focus on the home, on us. And again, his words got to me. He had always been the one to make sacrifices for me, so I felt like this was something I could do for him. It wasn't an immediate decision. I mulled it over for a few days, trying to figure out what I truly wanted. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that quitting my job was a way to show Francis that I was committed to fixing what I had broken. So I did it. I handed in my resignation, and just like that, my world became a little smaller, a little quieter. I didn't have my friends anymore, and now I didn't have my job. It was just me and Francis, and I thought that would be enough. But I had no idea that he was slowly pulling the strings to change everything between us. And then the loneliness really set in. I had cut off my friends, quit my job, and now all I had was Francis. But he seemed more distant than ever. It was as if no matter how hard I tried to hold on to him, to cling to the connection we once had, he kept slipping further and further away. I was desperate. I wanted things to go back to how they were, but it felt like we were on different wavelengths, like I was fighting for something that he had already given up on. The loneliness gnawed at me. There were times I would sit alone in the house, wondering how things had gotten so bad. Just when I thought I couldn't take it any longer, Francis suggested we go on a vacation. I was shocked. A vacation? It seemed out of the blue, but I was thrilled. I thought maybe this was his way of wanting to fix things, of trying to rekindle what had been lost between us. We hadn't had a real vacation in a long time, and the idea of getting away together felt like the perfect solution. I agreed without hesitation. I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe this was the turning point we needed. Francis took care of everything. He booked the Airbnb, bought the flight tickets, paid for everything down to the smallest detail. It felt like old times, like he was taking the lead and planning something special for us. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax, to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were going to get better. When we arrived at our destination, I was ready for a fresh start. I had all these ideas in my head about how the vacation would go, us spending time together, talking, reconnecting. But the reality was far from what I had imagined. For the first couple of days, we were there, but it didn't feel like we were together. Francis barely wanted to do anything with me. He wasn't interested in sightseeing or trying new things. All he wanted to do was stay in the hotel room and sleep. At first, I was annoyed. This was supposed to be our chance to fix things, to work on our marriage, and he was wasting it by hiding away in the room. I tried to push him to go out, to do things with me, but his disinterest was so obvious. It was clear that he wasn't there to spend time with me, and that realization was so painful. After a while, I stopped trying to force it. I figured if he didn't want to be with me, fine. I wasn't going to waste the vacation, so I started exploring on my own. Then one day I came back to the hotel room, expecting to find Francis there, maybe lounging around like he had been doing for most of the trip, but instead he was just gone. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe he had gone out for a walk or was grabbing something to eat. But when I tried calling him, the call didn't go through. My number was blocked. Confused, I texted him, but the messages wouldn't deliver. Panic started to bubble up inside me. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I checked the room again, hoping I was overreacting, but that's when I noticed his things were gone. His suitcase, his clothes, everything. It was like he had vanished. My heart began to race. Francis hadn't just gone out for a stroll. He had left. I rushed to check our joint bank account, and that's when the full weight of it crashed down on me. The account was empty. Every single dollar we had saved together, sure it was more his money than mine, but still, gone in an instant. He had cleared it out without a second thought. I stood there staring at the empty hotel room. My mind was spiraling as I tried to make sense of what was happening. He had brought me here to abandon me, to leave me stranded in a foreign place with no money, no way to contact him, and no way to get home. He had carefully planned this. The vacation I had thought would bring us closer together was just part of his revenge. I spent that night in a state of sheer panic. My mind kept replaying everything that had happened, trying to figure out how I had missed the signs. How had I not seen this coming? I was alone in that hotel room, pacing back and forth, tears streaming down my face, wondering what I was supposed to do next. How could Francis, the man who had once loved me so much, who had done everything to make me happy, be capable of something like this? The next morning, I woke up with a sense of dread, still no sign of Francis. But then I noticed that Francis had unblocked me. I was relieved. But it wasn't the message I had hoped for. There were no words, no explanation. Instead, he sent me screenshots of my group chat with my friends. My stomach churned as I opened them. Each one was worse than the last. There were all the horrible things my friends and I had said about him behind his back. I saw the messages where we called him names, mocked him for being too nice or obedient, referred to him as my dog, who would do anything for me. The cruel jokes that I had once thought were harmless now stared back at me like a slap in the face. And it wasn't just my friends. I was just as guilty. In some of those messages, I had been the one to instigate the conversation, egging them on as we all laughed at Francis's expense. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't need any further explanation. This was his revenge. This was how he got back at me for all the things I had done, for the way I had treated him. He had brought me here, on what I thought was a romantic getaway, just to humiliate me, to punish me in the cruelest way possible, by abandoning me and showing me exactly how much I had hurt him. Francis blocked me again after sending the screenshots, and that was it. There was no chance to explain, no opportunity to apologize. I sat there in the hotel room just feeling miserable. His wasn't just about that joke I had made. It was about everything. My betrayal, my disregard for his feelings, the way I had allowed my friends to influence me. He had been plotting this for who knows how long, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and I had walked right into his trap. I should have seen the signs. I should have known that something was off, that Francis wasn't just pulling away because he was upset. He had been planning this all along. The weeks I spent there were some of the most miserable of my life. By the very next day, I was forced to leave the hotel. Without a cent to my name, I had no way to pay for the room, so I had to check out. I stood outside the hotel, bags in hand, with absolutely nowhere to go and no clue what to do next. It was a terrifying feeling. I had no money, no place to stay, and no one to turn to. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but realized quickly that there was no one. I had no family to rely on. I'd cut ties with them when I left home at 18, and they weren't the type to welcome me back with open arms. I had no friends because under Francis's manipulation, I had severed all those connections. And as for our mutual friends back home, well, none of them were answering my texts or picking up my calls. I don't know what Francis had told them, but whatever it was, they clearly weren't on my side. Desperation crept in fast. I tried calling a few people, begging really, but nobody was willing to help. Some made excuses about how the plane tickets were too expensive. Others just stopped responding entirely. I felt utterly abandoned. Alone in a foreign country without anyone to lean on, I did the only thing I could. I started selling my things. It wasn't like I had much to begin with, but little by little I sold everything I could to scrape together enough money to get home. My souvenirs, my extra clothes, even my shoes. Everything was up for sale. It still took weeks to gather the money. Those weeks were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. I was stuck in a place that was so far from home, mentally and physically, and every day was a new battle just to survive. I'd never felt so low. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, I finally had enough to afford a plane ticket. But even then, going back home wasn't an option. I knew Francis wouldn't let me back into our house. He had made that much clear by abandoning me the way he did. So when I landed, I did the only thing I could think of. I went to my parents' house. To my surprise, they let me stay. But it came with conditions. They made it very clear that this wasn't a free pass. I would have to pay rent, and not just moving forward, but for all the months I stayed with them until I could pay. They would treat it as a debt that I would owe them, and once I got back on my feet, they expected me to pay them back in full. But still, it was a roof over my head, and for that, I was grateful. For a while, I was so emotionally drained and traumatized that I could barely function. Everything that had happened felt like a blur, but at the same time, it was all so painfully real. After a few weeks, when I had built up the courage, I went back to Francis's house to collect the rest of my things. He wasn't even surprised to see me. There was no confrontation, no fight, just an eerie calmness, like he had expected this all along. I packed up what little I had left. There wasn't much, just a few boxes of clothes and personal items. A couple of weeks later, I was served with divorce papers. It was the final blow, the ultimate end to what I thought had been a loving relationship. I had believed Francis loved me unconditionally. I had convinced myself that no matter what, he would always be there for me. But now, looking back, I see how wrong I was. He had set me up, manipulated me, and then abandoned me when I was most vulnerable. What hurts the most is that this wasn't just a breakup. It was an elaborate act of revenge. Francis didn't just want to leave me. He wanted to punish me. He wanted me to feel the full weight of my betrayal, to experience the same pain and isolation that I had unknowingly inflicted on him. And in many ways, he succeeded. Being stranded in a foreign country with no money, no friends, and no way out was the most terrifying experience of my life. Now I'm back home, trying to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. I'm stuck living with my parents, drowning in debt, and unable to find a job. To make matters worse, I can't even afford a lawyer to help me with the divorce. Every time I think about taking him to court, I wonder if I even stand a chance. Francis was always so good at playing the victim, and I'm sure he'll paint me as the villain in all of this. I guess I'm just posting this here to vent, to get some advice, or maybe just to figure out what to do next. I'm lost, and I feel like I've hit rock bottom. Do I even have a shot at winning anything in court? How can I fight back when I don't have the resources to even hire a lawyer? Everything feels so hopeless right now. I need advice, Reddit, because I don't know where to go from here. Update. Hello, Reddit. First of all, I want to say a big thank you to those of you who actually sympathize with me. Honestly, it means so much to know that there are people out there who understand, even if it's just a few of you. Thank you for the kind words and support. But to the rest of you, the ones who said I deserved everything that happened, that I was guilty and should suffer for it, I get it. I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt Francis, and I've been paying the price for it. But does that mean I deserve to be left stranded in a foreign country with nothing? Does it mean I deserve to be humiliated and abandoned like that? No one deserves to go through something that traumatizing, no matter how bad the mistake they made. It's crazy to think that some of you don't realize how horrific this experience was. I had to live on the streets in a country I barely understood, a country where I had no one and nothing. Imagine trying to survive in a place where you don't speak the language well, where you don't know the culture or the people, and you have absolutely no support system. That's what Francis put me through. It was terrifying, and I wouldn't wish that kind of loneliness and fear on anyone, not even on him. What breaks my heart the most is that this is a man I thought would always love me, protect me, and be there for me no matter what. I trusted him, believed that we could work through anything together. But instead of talking to me or confronting me about the mistakes I made, he chose revenge. He abandoned me in the worst possible way. He completely broke my heart. And for those saying I deserved it, do you really think revenge is the answer to everything? Does punishing someone like that actually heal anything? To be honest, I didn't even expect my original post to get this much attention. I thought I'd get a few comments, maybe some advice, and that would be that. But here we are, over 1,000 comments, and they're still coming. It's been overwhelming to see so many people weigh in, both good and bad. I've read a lot of them, and while some of the harsh ones stung, I appreciated the different perspectives. It's given me a lot to think about, even if I don't agree with all of it. As for where I am now, well, I'm still living at my parents' house. Yep, I'm paying rent, or at least I will be once I have the money. My parents made it clear from the beginning that this is temporary, and that I owe them for every month I stay. I guess it's better than nothing, but it's hard not to feel like a burden. I hate that I'm here, that I'm back to square one, relying on the very people I once swore I'd never go back to. I do have a couple of job interviews lined up in the next few weeks. Honestly, I'm willing to take any job at this point. I don't care if it's low paying or something I never imagined myself doing. I just need to get back on my feet. I need some sort of income so I can stop feeling like a complete failure. Every day I wake up feeling like I've lost everything, and the only way I can get out of this mess is by starting somewhere, anywhere. And for those of you suggesting I contest Francis taking the money from our joint account, I appreciate the advice, but the truth is I really can't. Most of the money in that account, about 90%, was his. Francis was always the responsible one when it came to saving and planning ahead. I wasn't. So what would be the point of fighting him over it? I didn't contribute much to that account, and even if I did want to challenge him, it's not like I can afford a lawyer to begin with. I know it sounds hopeless, but I've accepted that there's not much I can do about the financial part of things. I have to move on from that. Right now, my focus is just on getting a job, rebuilding my life piece by piece, and figuring out how to move forward from here. I guess that's why I'm posting again, to rant, to vent, to get things off my chest. I just needed a place to let it all out, and I appreciate that I've been able to do that here. So thank you to everyone who took the time to read, comment, or offer advice. Even if things aren't looking up right now, I know I'll figure it out eventually. I have to. Thanks again, Reddit. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's been a while since I last posted. If you don't remember me, you can check my profile for my previous posts. Logged back in and saw a lot of requests for an update, so I might as well update you guys on where things stand now. First of all, the divorce is finalized. Yes, it's officially over. Unfortunately, I didn't walk away with much. In fact, I barely got anything. The laws in my state didn't work in my favor at all. No spousal support, no kids to negotiate for, and no joint debts, so there wasn't much to fight for. The house? It was in his name, bought with his money, so it was legally his. Even my car wasn't mine. It was in his name because he had been making the payments. So yeah, I walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back and a lot of emotional baggage. I've managed to get a job, though it's nothing glamorous. It's a minimum wage job, and I hate it. I never imagined I'd end up working in this industry, and it's been a humbling experience, to say the least. I have a whole new respect for people in this line of work because it's tough. The hours are long, the pay is crap, and the work is exhausting. But right now, it's better than nothing. As for how I've been doing overall, honestly, I'm just getting by. I'm miserable. I'm still traumatized by everything that happened, and I haven't really moved past it yet. There are days when I still miss my ex-husband, despite everything. It's hard to reconcile the person I thought he was with the person who abandoned me in the worst way possible. And if you're wondering about my friends, well, let's just say I don't have any right now. Not one of our mutual friends has reached out to me, not a single one. It's like I've been erased from their lives, like I never existed. It's lonely. My life right now consists of nothing but work and home, back and forth. It's not like I'm on good terms with my family either, so living with them hasn't been easy. Every day feels like a struggle just to get through, and they never fail to remind me of how miserable I am. They throw it in my face constantly, reminding me of every mistake, every wrong turn. So, yeah, it's been a pretty miserable existence. It's not fun by any means, but at least I've been surviving. So yeah, that's my update. Thanks for reading, I guess.